all of those decisions that evolution has made for the sake of value along the way, through evolution moving towards ever deeper and wider configurations of intimacy, driven by its own inherent desire for more and more union, more and more mutuality, more and more recognition, more and more embrace, all of those live inside of us. We are in the second week of 2023. We are here together in the space of revolution. And by revolution, we mean the rejection of the status quo. It can be more, it has to be more. We actually recognize that we are at this moment poised between utopia and dystopia, between a world unimaginably beautiful and a world which is unimaginably dystopian. And at this place in which these two paths diverge in the woods, what we do here together has the capacity to make all the difference. You know, in our public face, we're a think tank, and we started 2009 as the Center for World Spirituality, and we evolved to become the Center for Integral Wisdom. And I was privileged to co-found the think tank with my dear friend Ken Wilber, who remains deeply involved, and with Sally Kempton and Marina Kaplan. Zach Stein joined soon afterwards, and Kirsten Zohar a little bit later, right? And oh my God, we began this incredible adventure into this enormous, unimaginable responsibility to actually be on the inside of the inside, in our interior, not just a think tank, but what we called sometime in 2013 or 2014, right, a band of outrageous lovers who are committed to evolve the source code, the very superstructure of reality, the very story in which reality lives and from which reality generates in response to the meta crisis. And so that's who we are. And in this generation, the threat is unlike any other prior generation, with its extraction technologies and its exponentialized access to weaponized forms of destruction, with its polarization, with the global nature of our society, with the realization that actually every civilization has fallen. We haven't healed the fracture lines that caused civilizations to fall, but now we're a global civilization with exponential power, but without a story of value that's equal to our power. And so what we came together to say was, and not just to say, not just to declare, but to act as a band of outrageous lovers, is to actually tell the new story, to tell the new story of value. But to tell the new story, we have to figure it out. What's the plot line? What's the storyline? Value has broken down at the center of the academy. How do we reconstruct value? When Nick Bostrom wrote a book in 2015, and then it was republished in 2017, called Superintelligence, he ends the book with the value loading problem. He's talking about the issue of AI. It was the book that put artificial intelligence and its potential and its peril at the center of the conversation. It has a quote from Bill Gates in the cover and Musk on the cover. And in the end, Bostrom can't work it out. He's incredibly uneven, quite sophisticated when talking about AI, but then realizes that you can't engage AI without engaging the issue of value. And he runs into what he calls the value loading problem, which is a twofold problem. And the first piece of the problem is, which I'm going to focus on now, is what is value? We've lost our access to value. And what's the story, which is our shared story of value in which we live? Now, although Bostrom doesn't articulate it this way, this is essentially what he means, and he crashes. And the book crashes. in this moment of meta-crisis, we can't just fix infrastructure, and Bostrom's work is filled with potential infrastructure fixes. We can't just fix social structure. We actually have to fix the very superstructure, the story of value from which we generate. What are the first principles and first values? We have to reclaim first principles and first values. Evolving first principles and first values embedded in a story of value. And that reclamation is the revolution. But to do that, we have to actually step so deeply in, so beyond the polarization of the different web echo chambers, whether it's the CNN echo chamber in the United States or the Tucker Carlson Fox News echo chamber in the United States, or their equivalents in France or Belgium or England or South Africa, right, or New Zealand, right, or wherever people are in the world, or Antarctica, wherever people are listening, all the continents. I think I missed a couple of the continents, but wherever people are listening, I think we have people from about 5 continents, right? We have to actually speak into this moment and articulate this new story of value. Now, one of the methodologies that we use is we engage the texts of public culture. Does that make sense, everyone? We engage the text of public culture. And so we're taking last week, this week, and probably next week, we're taking this new text of public culture called Avatar. And we're looking to try and articulate what are the possibilities that are in the imagination of public culture that are inchoate, that actually need to be articulated, because often the new story of value comes not only from philosophers or spiritual teachers, which is where I spend my time, but from the intuitive voices across public culture, whether it be science fiction or the arts, right, or poetry, or the shamanic practices, or the realms of healing, or the texts of public culture as they appear in the cinematic form. And so we're looking at Avatar. We're going to think about Iran, right, in this moment where men and young women, young men and young women are being hung as a result of their participation in the nationwide protests that were sparked by Masha Amin's murder that we talked about a few weeks ago. A 22-year-old man, a 39-year-old man, a number of young girls, 17, 18, right, as we talk. And so Iran is with us, right? And every city in Iran and the pain of Iran is specifically and uniquely and gorgeously with us this week, even as we take our seat and we say we are madly committed to enact a world, right, in which there are no hangings and there are no tens of millions of people who don't have health insurance, and which there's no one outside of the circle, which every part of ourselves that's been split off gets reintegrated into the circle, right, to create a world that works for everyone, right, to create a world more unimaginably beautiful, good and true than ever existed in history, because that's actually the possibility that beckons, even as an unimaginably dark dystopia beckons at the same time. So I want to, with your permission, just look for a second, right, at an image. Okay, we ready to go? Let's look at an image. So there's an image that appears in Avatar, and I want to look again, if I can, at a short clip that we saw last week. And it was a clip, right? Whoever is the Lord of clips, it was the clip of Grace, who is the biological researcher that Christina Tahel talked about in the Dharma recap, which we invoked her last week. And she's having this argument with Selfridge. And Selfridge, and this is an Avatar 1. And even if you haven't seen the movies, you can step in and just relax and find your way. So we're in Avatar 1, and Earth is desperately in need of sufficient raw materials, particularly this particular raw material, this particular extracted metal is called symbolically unobtainium. in the movie. And in fact, all of reality is powered by energy. Everything we do. And the more dollars we spend to grow, the more we increase growth, which is financial dollars. One of the things we forget is that financial dollars actually equal expenditures of energy. And the extraction model that has brought us to a point where we're actually at a place we don't have enough energy to expend, or it'll be too expensive to expend the energy. So if we continue the fundamental growth curve, or which means a growth curve of finances and products, those finances and products actually equal energy, right? Then inevitably, in the very infrastructure of reality, we hit a collapse. And in that collapse, right, collapses the system. And many people have talked about this over the last 40 years. It began at the Club of Rome, and Paul Ehrlich did some important conversations on this, right? A gentleman I spoke to a week ago, just in a kind of check-in phone call, Nate Hagans, is doing some really important work in talking about this and kind of recapitulating this literature through his own prism. And what's going to happen is this fundamental collapse. And so Avatar opens into this reality. Does everyone get that? Avatar is opening into this kind of reality in which Earth is on the brink of collapse. So it goes to exploit other systems, particularly Pandora, right, which has this very, very valuable mineral that Earth needs. And this is Avatar 1. What happens, though, is they encounter, if you remember, they encounter this incredible civilization, which is deeply embodied. You feel the lie of the bodies, the near nakedness of heart, right? The second simplicity, the beauty, the elegance, right? The sense of being part of a larger system, right? The information contained in the larger system, the awesome wisdom and meaning, right? That actually lives, right, in the system itself. So it's very beautiful. Right, it has some fundamental weaknesses that we'll get to in a second, but it's very beautiful. And there's an image of AI, right? There's a counter image to AI that's set up in the movie that we mentioned in, 1 minute in passing last week. And Christina Tahel mentioned it in her recapitulation at the beginning of this week, but I want to put it, front and center again so we can see it. Okay? Is everybody with us? Let's find each other in the chat box. Are we ready to go? So what's the fundamental, let's see if we can kind of just see it together, right? What's the fundamental problem of AI? What's the fundamental AI problem? So the fundamental AI problem, kind of at its very, very core, right, is that, and I'm going to try and say it much more clearly than we did last week, is that AI, and it's a twofold problem. Okay, one, AI is raw computational power. When I went to write my doctorate at Oxford University, which was one of the few kind of formal educational or kind of professional things I did that my mother has approved of in the last 20 years. She was pleased, right? I have a Jewish mother. So my son, the doctor from Oxford, right? That made mom happy. Mom, if you're listening, which I know you're not, but hey, that was for you. So when I would study at the Bodleian Library, they had a picture outside the Bodleian Library of 5 men from the neck up, which was Western civilization's view of knowledge, right? 5 men from the neck up. But that's not even what AI is, because when you're from the neck up, right, at least your raw intellect has to draw on the rest of your body. But imagine, if you will, symbolically, a head severed from the body. That's actually AI. So AI is raw computational power without any access to the feeling tone or field of value or value tone of the cosmos. So AI is tone deaf to value. AI has no perception, no valueception. AI doesn't have access to the eye of value. AI has access to the eye of the mind, raw computational power, to the eye of the senses, through gathering empirical data, which are concrete, objective, and measurable. But AI bypasses the entire field of value. Now, let's deepen that. We said that last week, and Christina recapitulated that beautifully this week. Let's deepen it. So here it gets very beautiful and very subtle. So we ready, everyone? See, what happens is value is actually inherent in cosmos from quite literally, the very first moments of the Big Bang. I'm thinking of two things now. I'm thinking about what I'm talking about. I'm thinking about the fact that I have something in my eye. So let's see if we can try not to think about both of those things at the same time. Okay? So value, right, is actually incepted in cosmos at the very beginning. Meaning, value means I make a decision. I choose this direction and not that direction because I have a set of preferences. That's what value means. Value means I have a desire, and my desire is for a future that's different, but not only different, value means I have a desire for a future that's better than the present. What does better mean? Better means there's more value. And there's an intrinsic ought in cosmos. Something is better than something else. And cosmos has a direction. It has a telos. It's moving someplace. It has an appetite, right? Desire is appetite. There's an appetition to cosmos. And that appetition, that appetite to cosmos, appetite is the way that the mathematician Alfred North Whitehead described it, who wrote Principia Mathematica with George Bertrand Russell. I use the word desire, right? There's an intrinsic desire, which is the taste of the Eros of cosmos. Cosmos wants to go someplace. Where does it want to go? Cosmos wants life. Cosmos wants life. And cosmos wants life which chooses for more and more value. Now, that quality of cosmos begins at the very beginning. It's incipient at the very beginning. It's a proto-experience of choosing for value. Quarks don't actually create stable relationship with every other quark. They actually make a choice. There's a choice that's inherently built into quarks. They choose this quark and not that quark. And if they choose the wrong quark, there's no relationship. And when you don't have a holy trinity of three quarks that create stable relationship, disappearance and death. And so there's this movement in cosmos towards life. Now, life doesn't mean that you live forever. It's not everlasting life, but it's a movement towards life. It's a movement in which separate parts seek to create larger wholes, in which new intimacies, which are new shared identities with ever deeper structures of mutuality, recognition, union, and embrace appear. And that begins with quarks, and it goes to subatomic particles, and it goes to atoms, then it goes to elementary molecules, and then to macromolecules, and then to cells and to multicellular life, right? This is a core movement of cosmos in which cosmos makes choices for more value, for ever more depth, for ever more goodness, for ever more interconnectivity, for ever more creativity, for ever more consciousness, for ever more care, right? For ever more love or eros. So all of these, ever more consciousness, ever more creativity, ever more eros, ever deeper and wider fields of desire, ever more perception, ever more knowing, and ever more mutuality, ever more recognition, ever more union, ever more embrace, right? All of that, are you tracking everybody? All of that, those are values of cosmos. Those are first principles and first values of cosmos. And cosmos is making decisions for life all the time. And those first principles and first values, those are what we call them first principles and first values in this new story of value we're telling, CosmoErotic Humanism. It's the name of this new story of value, this meta theory that integrates, trying to integrate all meta theories that we can across the board, right, from every period in history, right, in the sciences, in physics, in biology, in economics, in sociology, in anthropology. We're trying to integrate all these meta theories into a second simplicity in which we identify the first principles and first values of cosmos, and we understand that those are the plot lines of reality. And those plot lines of reality are trying to go someplace, and that someplace is to ever more value. And so all through evolution, this is the huge like drum roll. Do we have a drum roll here? I know this is a big, it's an incredibly simple but incredibly sophisticated point. And if you get this, you become a different person. And it changes something. So we ready? Can we get this? It's big. So what's happening is all of those decisions that evolution has made for the sake of value along the way, through evolution moving towards ever deeper and wider configurations of intimacy, driven by its own inherent desire for more and more union, more and more mutuality, more and more recognition, more and more embrace, all of those live inside of us. Because all of the, from the gluons to the quarks, to the hadrons, to the leptons, right, to the muons, right, the atoms, right, all of it, cells, right, the organisms, the organelles, right, the organic systems, right, all of that lives in us. We're part of this larger field, and that entire field lives in us. It's not just true that we live in an amorous cosmos, a cosmos driven by Eros, by Amor, but the amorous cosmos quite literally lives in us. So by the time we get to the neck up, we've got the entire body. And that body is alive, right? We matter, right? Things matter, means they have meaning, because that which matters is written in the script of matter, right? In the mattering of the body, which is why Job, one of the ancient sacred texts, Job says, through my body, I vision God, right? So AI cuts all of that off. Does that make sense, everyone? AI bypasses all of that and goes directly to raw computational power. And although he doesn't say any of this, but if you read Bostrom's 2015-2017 book, Superintelligence, implicitly, this is the problem he's wrestling with. We have no idea what AI is going to do because it's not in the field of value. And Bostrom, at the end of the book, gets to this value loading problem and doesn't know how to solve it, right? Because he assumes, right, the dogma of the mainstream modern and postmodern academy that value has broken down. Okay, wow. Okay, so that's what AI is. Now, the alternative image is actually dropped into culture by Avatar. And it's so beautiful. I just want to take the time to express it. But the alternative image is, and let's go see this scene now. If we can go see this scene now. We saw it last week, but I want to see it again, particularly when Grace describes to Selfridge, and whoever the holy uploaders of scenes, get ready. When Grace describes to Selfridge what the field of Pandora is and why that's so unimaginably important. Okay, we ready? So let's just take a look at that scene now for a second. It's stunning.
I'm not talking about some kind of pagan voodoo here. I'm talking about something real, something measurable in the biology of the forest.
Which is what exactly?
What we think we know is that there's some kind of electrochemical communication between the roots of the trees, like the synapses between neurons. And each tree has 10 to the 4th connections to the trees around it. And there are 10 to the 12th trees on Pandora.
Which is a lot, I'm guessing.
It's more connections than the human brain. Get it?
So we're interested in the last part of that scene, right? The scene begins where you see Jake in his avatar body, right? Trying to create some last possibility of peace, right? We then see this moment in which Jake kind of challenges and tries to stop the bulldozers. We're not going to talk about those scenes now. We're interested in the scene that was right afterwards, okay? Everyone catch the scene right afterwards? You've got Grace, who's the scientist, right? Who remembers what we're talking about now, right? Grace, give it a yes in the chat box if you're tracking this. Grace is the scientist, right? And she's talking to Selfridge, who's kind of the bureaucrat administrator, and Miles Quatrich is there, who's the kind of Ranger Rick, you know, Marine. And we'll talk about him in a little bit. He's a complex figure, clearly a villainous figure in Avatar 1, more complex figure he becomes in Avatar 2. But at this point, he's a clear villain figure. And then Grace says that there are more synapses connecting, right, the entire system of trees and nature on Pandora than the human brain. Now, here's the key. And then she says, and I'm going to remember what she says next. Then she says that the Navi can access, they can download and upload to the system. So the Navi are now part of the system. That's the point. The Navi are now part of the system. Okay, that's the key. So you've got the system of AI, meaning access to the entire field of information. And information here is wisdom. Information is value. Information is meaning. So value and meaning live all the way down the evolutionary chain. And as we have, way before there's a human neocortex that tells stories of value, that's able to articulate them, we have from the first nanoseconds of the Big Bang, an entire set of mathematical values and physical values that are actually inherently choosing direction and moving towards more value. That begins the world of matter. There's a pan-interiority that lives throughout the world, and then that evolves, increases. The interiority gets more and more deep, more and more profound, more and more conscious, more and more unique. So we move towards more and more consciousness, more and more conscious choice, more and more conscious, ultimately we get to conscious evolution, more and more eros, more and more depth. But that the entire system is connected. And the human being, and here's the key sentence, the human being participates in that field of value. That's what we call in CosmoErotic Humanism anthro-ontology. Anthro, right? The human being ontology accesses the real information, the real value of all of cosmos. And the entire system is connected. So that's an alternative to AI. AI has super computational power in terms of raw computation. So what do we need to do? So we need to create a relationship between this human world, right, that actually begins to recognize itself in the field of value, to recognize that I'm not dissociated from the field of value, that I'm not alienated from the field of value, that I'm not merely a separate self. I'm not just a skin encapsulated ego who's coding AI, but I'm actually a participant in the field of value itself. I'm a unique node in the great network of value that moves all the way up and all the way down the evolutionary chain. That's the alternative to AI. Now, both of those actually have enormous power. And it's massive computational power and the human ability to access the field of value. Both of those are critical, right? Neither should be demonized. But what we need to do that Avatar never does is actually embrace the potential and the beauty of both of them. What Avatar does is splits between them, polarizes between them, and actually paradoxically, this is the paradox of Avatar, and as it sees the Navi possibility, right? It sees this field of value. It actually gets this notion that there's value all the way down and all the way up. And that's not a religious notion. It's not a fundamentalist notion. I've written together with Howard Bloom and Zach Stein an essay on, and Howard Bloom is kind of like a guru figure at NASA, one of the best philosophers of science and scientists, published across journals. We wrote an article we haven't yet published on the notion that value goes all the way down and all the way up. Value decisions are always being made in cosmos. There's a field of value which is mathematical and scientific, and then that becomes more and more conscious. Right? Wow. And that all lives inside of us. And the reason that science works is because we're cosmic humans. The reason we can feel through mathematics to the very edges of the cosmos is because those mathematics and all of their elegance live inside of us. All of cosmos lives in us. So we can feel into cosmos through the fields of value that are mathematics. But those fields of value have to meet, have to be in dance with, have to be embraced with. They have to be intimate with the field of interior value. And what we've done instead, and paradoxically, I want to catch this, everyone. Paradoxically, catch this, everyone. Paradoxically, Avatar actually repeats the polarization. It actually sets up the same polarization, right, of interiors, gorgeously expressed, embodiment, gorgeously expressed, embodiment which is plugged into, which accesses the field of value, stunningly expressed, and, right, the alienated, desiccated technologies, right? We're talking about AI. They're not actually quite talking about AI and Avatar, but let's put the two conversations together, right? The AI that's dissociated from the field of value and the technologies, right, of the Avatar movies that are dissociated from the field of value, those are set up against each other. A complete and radical polarization, and the synergy never begins to take place. So that's one. Does everyone get that? It's like, whoa. Okay, it's like, wow. Okay, so that's one. Now let's go deeper. Let's go deeper. Now there's a, go deeper. We have a drum roll. Let's go deeper. Let's go to the next step. We ready to go to the next step? Let's go a big, huge next step now to try and actually understand what's really happening in Avatar. Okay, now the next step of Avatar is equally important. It's subtle, and I want to try and just in this gentle conversation access it with you. Avatar begins to introduce a possibility that actually lives in the great traditions. It lives in the interior sciences of Hebrew wisdom, right? It lives in the teachings, one way or the other, of all of the great interior science traditions, which is that we live in a galactic reality. And that actually, we don't just live on a planet. We don't just need to move from ethnocentric, meaning I'm identified with my tribe, to world-centric, I'm one with all human beings. We don't just need to move from world-centric to a kind of human-animal cosmocentric, meaning I'm one not just with all human beings, but with all of Gaia on planet Earth and all of the animals on planet Earth and with the planet itself, which is how this move from ethnocentric to world-centric to cosmocentric is usually understood. But as we've said over the past years, but I want to now focus on it more clearly, our love story has to be an intergalactic love story. Wow. Which is why we call it CosmoErotic Humanism. Cosmos is the largest frame. And when the Greeks spelled cosmos, they did it with a K to include not just the material, but to include interiors and exteriors. But whether we spell it with a C or with a K, what we mean by cosmos is interiors and exteriors. And CosmoErotic Humanism means, now let's add to our story of value here, that actually our human experience of love, humanism, is accessing something which is not a local human experience. It's not, I'm going to create a new word. It's not an ethno-human experience. It's an amorous value of cosmos. The universe is a love story. The galaxy, a love story. It's an intergalactic love story. Now, strangely and fascinatingly and importantly, the great traditions of the interior sciences, for all of their great flaws that we've talked about, actually understood this. And they did not have a problem. They actually talked constantly about extra dimensionals, meaning beings, qualities that came from dimensions that were beyond the dimension that we live in here in this terrestia of planet Earth. And they talked about extraterrestrials. For example, in the book of Genesis, there's this discussion of the B'nai Elohim, the sons of gods, right, who make love in a particular way. And it's a conversation with Benot Adam, with the daughters of Adam. And the Nephilim, right, those who fell, right, to this world. And there's an enormous and extensive interior science tradition, right, within, for example, Hebrew wisdom, that talks about this notion of this intergalactic amor. I was talking to yesterday my friend and colleague Sean Hargens, and he told me about a Dzogchen tradition, right? A tradition within Tibetan Buddhism, right? That does the same thing, that talks about this teaching of Tibetan Buddhism being taught in the 13 planetary systems. Now, notice for a second that this intergalactic or extra-dimensional, right, or extraterrestrial world, this what Jeffrey Kripal talks about, right, this wild cosmos that we live in, was actually a threat, not to the interior sciences of the great traditions, but to materialist science. Materialist science didn't know what to do with this possibility. And for that and multiple other reasons, there was a deliberate decision made by the governments of the world to essentially block out the information that we had about this very genuine, not just possibility, but probability. And for several decades, right, this information has been deliberately obfuscated, deliberately blocked out. And it's only in the last 5 or 6 years that it's actually broken through. And literally, if you track the last 3 or 4 years, every couple of months, sometimes every few weeks, you have a new revelation by a particular government that acknowledges the United States, first among them, that it's had a program, that it's tracking this information, that the best explanation for the information that they've gathered in their empirical research is some version of what we're describing here, a kind of intergalactic intelligence. And that's now not fringe information. 10 years ago, if you said that that was fringe, that's now in the mainstream publications, right, of not just rare science journals, but the mainstream media sources, the legacy media sources of the entire Western world. Wow. So we begin to have this notion of this intergalactic possibility. But friends, now stay close. What's the nature of this intergalactic possibility, friends, going to be? Is it going to be fundamentally a repeat of the wars of Earth, right? Meaning intergalactic warfare. Does everyone get this? Or will we actually reach for a better possibility, which is the universal love story? So when we started to talk about CosmoErotic Humanism, CosmoErotic Humanism is about the notion that our human experience of love, right, participates, right, in a larger galactic reality, and that actually reality is Eros. That Eros, now stay close, friends, and this is so beautiful and it's so important. Love is not a social construction. Love is not something that lives only between a particular species, right? We actually can love each other across species. So for example, humans can love animals. Now we might create boundaries of how we interact with animals, right? For lots of reasons, to respect and honor, right, the animal world, to respect and honor the human world, right? To kind of hold, for example, sexuality in a particular kind of container, which is about shared meaning structures, right? And interiority between people and the creation of a future. But we don't limit love. And we can love across the boundaries of species, and we can even create fields of Eros, right, of all kinds across species. And that's exactly at the very heart of the Avatar movie. That's the question at play. We have an incredible next period of time coming up, and I want to actually look with you at a couple of clips. Okay, so we can actually begin to understand this because it's so wild and so beautiful. But we're going to dive in here. This is a special moment in Cosmos. This is the special moment in CosmoErotic Humanism when we get to actually begin to unpack this new possibility. So what I want to do is, we're not going to do it all today, but I want to look at a couple of things. We've got these 2 basic figures, right? Are we ready to go? Okay. We've got these 2 basic figures. One figure is Miles Quatrich in Avatar 1. And who's Miles Quatrich in Avatar 1? Miles Quatrich in Avatar 1 is this Marine colonel who we're going to call ethno-human. Right? He's a racist, right? But he's a racist in the sense that only humans matter. Anyone who's not human, right, isn't actually worthy, right, of encounter, and is certainly not worthy of love. And as Miles Quatrich in movie 1 is standing against CosmoErotic Humanism, he understands love to be legitimate between humans. You can maybe have sex out of that category, as we'll see in a couple of minutes, but you certainly can't love, right? Love across boundaries doesn't make any sense to him. And actually, anyone who's not human is quite literally subhuman, but not only animals, but any other race. And I want to take a look at the first and last scene. There are two scenes in which Miles talks to the people in Avatar 1. He talks to the community and tells them about what their mission is. There's scene 1 and scene 2. We're going to the movies now, so I hope you have popcorn, maybe a little water, maybe some rum, maybe some Diet Coke, maybe some juice, right? Let's actually read the texts of culture and let's actually participate together in these next few minutes directly in the evolution of love. So here we go.
You are not in Kansas anymore. You are on Pandora. Out there beyond that fence, every living thing that crawls, flies, or squats in the mud wants to kill you and eat your eyes for jujubes. They are very hard to kill. If you wish to survive, you need to cultivate a strong mental attitude. You've got to obey the rules. Pandora rules. Rule number 1.
It's nothing like an old school safety brief to put your mind at ease.
We saw they get to Pandora. Anyone outside the fence, meaning the fence of being a human being, because he's an ethno-human racist, right, is crawling in the mud, is ready to kill you, is ready to eat your eyes, and they're hard to kill. But the point is, you should be killing them, because there is no such thing as thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not murder applies only to people within humanity. But outside the human camp, we murder. And it's not called murder, it's called our survival. And when he hears this, just notice, this is the key though to the clip. When Jake Scully hears this, he's comforted. Does everyone catch what he said? This is critical. Does everyone catch what Jake Scully said? That was the most important part of the clip. At the very end, Jake Scully comes and he hears it and he says, nothing more comforting, right, than a kind of an old style safety brief, meaning he's at home there. That is Jake Scully's consciousness. That's the consciousness of every human being. But that's a given. And by the way, in the human world today, right, on planet Earth, we look at animals in that way. So we kill animals in factory farms and we put lambs in little concentration camps where we torture them for 3 months so we can have about 90 seconds of lamb chops because we actually are alienated. We can't see them. I don't see the animal, but I don't see. There's a failure of vision. There's a failure to see. Okay? And everyone participates in that. And so that now becomes, in this intergalactic world, do we move into a world in which we are humanity? And one of the reasons that extraterrestrials were locked down, because the assumption was they must be hostiles. And if they're hostiles, we don't want to let people know about hostiles. We want to figure out how to protect from them. Right? And that was kind of an implicit assumption. Let's take a look at the second clip. Let's take a look at the second clip, everybody. And we're at the end of Avatar, and now he's giving a talk, and now it's going to be even more dramatic. You're going to see ethno-humanism at its height. Take us inside. Let's play again just the last, like 60 seconds of the clip when he says, blast a hole in their racial memory. And that's a fact that they'll never come within, you know, whatever distance of this planet again. I want to play the last like 90 seconds of that clip again, but this time watch the faces of the people listening. Okay, let's play the clip again. Play it again, Sam, Woody Allen. Let's play it again. But now watch the faces, friends, of the people listening. Let's play it again.
Now, the hostiles believe that this mountain stronghold of theirs is protected by their deity. And when we destroy it, we will blast a crater in their racial memory so deep that they won't come within 1,000 clicks of this place ever again. And that, too, is a fact.
Did everyone watch, everyone see the faces? Those faces are not evil people. Those faces are the people that you have for dinner. And it's not just men, it's men and women. Everyone is completely aligned with him. These are good people. That's the point. These are good people. These are men. These are women. They're kind people. They're kind to their families. They're great parents. They're wonderful people. And yet the people who are outside of the perimeter are an aboriginal horde. They're hostiles. They don't have a name. They don't have faces. And we're going to blast a crater in their racial memory. In other words, they're quite literally dehumanized, right? We now have their terrorists, right? And we now have a new understanding of what it means to dehumanize, which is one very strong approach to this intergalactic moment. Does everyone get that? Wow. Okay. Now, let's go to the next step. What's Avatar about? Who stands? What's the story about? And let's go deep inside. What's the story about? So we see Jake Scully, we saw in the beginning of one of the clips, who's had his body blasted, right, as a Marine. And he now goes to this Avatar program to take the place of his brother, right, who's been killed. Now, when he finds his way in this Avatar body, and I'm not going to go through all of the scenes now, but I'm just going to mention the scenes as we go, right? He makes a deal with Miles Quatrich, who he's totally loyal to. And Miles Quatrich tells him, you help me out, we'll take care of your legs because I take care of my own. Right? That's the third scene. We're not going to show, I take care of my own. Meaning, within humanity, I take care of those who are loyal to me, to those who are on my team. That's 3. Then 4, something slowly happens. Grace, the doctor, right, the biologist who we saw earlier, gives Jake a particular piece of advice. He says, see what they see. Those are the actual words that she uses. Can you see what they see? Can you see through their eyes? That's number 4. Number 5, Jake goes in his avatar body with Grace in her avatar body. They go on a field research trip. Jake is separated from the rest of the group. He's left alone at night in the forest, and through sheer raw bravery, right, barely survives. And then Neytiri finds him. Neytiri is the daughter of the chieftain and chief woman of the Omaticaya clan. Right? She saves Jake, and she says, you're brave but foolish. You're an idiot. There was no reason for you to kill these animals, right, that you killed. So she says, sometimes there's a reason to kill animals, and then we have to do it in a way that's sacred. But the way you kill animals when you're alienated from them, right, is a degradation. He doesn't quite know what she's talking about. He wants to follow her back to the clan because he's under orders from Quatrich to make friends with everyone, right, in order to essentially be able to betray them. She doesn't want to bring him back to the clan. She doesn't think he has any place there. But there are, let me just check in the chat box who remembers this. There are 2 interventions that take place that are done by Awa. And Awa is the field of value, the field of spirit. When she says to Jake, I'm not taking you back to my people. If you remember, there are these very, very beautiful, almost fairy-like, butterfly-like entities, right, that actually land in 2 scenes and actually embrace and kind of cover Jake up and enwrap him and embrace him. She understands that there's been some intervention by Awa, that some larger intelligence is here at play, and she brings Jake back. And then her mother, much to her chagrin, tells her that they're gonna try and break the ethnocentricity of the Na'vi, which is the name of their people, and actually try and bring Jake in. So it's this very audacious moment where the Na'vi, Neytiri is the daughter of the Na'vi tribe, the Na'vi are going to try and actually make some connection with Jake and try and understand him and try and teach him to see through their eyes. What happens? Number 6, Jake falls in love with Neytiri, and Neytiri falls in love with Jake. And Jake begins to see through her eyes. And actually, and we'll see it next week, right? The phrase, I see you, which is a form of I love you, right? Love is not merely an emotion. And we're going to read this week the code at the very end. Love is a perception. Love means that I see you. And we're going to talk about that more next week. But I see you runs as a theme, the ability to actually see beneath the ethno-human or the ethno-Navi. And for a moment, to actually see each other as we really are. Can we take the mask off and know that that which unites us is so much greater than that which divides us, and that we live in a cosmoerotic universe, and Eros moves through all of us. And so this story is a story of an inter-being love story. It's a love story between the Navi and the human. That's very dramatic. Now, who doesn't get that? Now, stay close, friends. It's very beautiful. Who doesn't get that? Quatrich. Quatrich, speaking from his ethno-human perspective, views Jake as having betrayed his team. And that makes perfect sense. And Quatrich, twice in the movie, once he says to Jake, he says, you got some local tail and you forgot what team you're playing for. Everyone got that? You got some local tail. I mean, he doesn't understand that love is at play. You know, it's almost more like local tail means some pornographic kind of raw sexual fulfillment that has nothing to do with love. Sex, right, as a physiological act dissociated from the field of love. Quatrich doesn't understand that sex is love in the body. So he says, you got some local tail, and then you forgot what team you're playing for. That's one Quatrich scene, number 8 or 9, and then 10. And then towards the end of the movie, there's this huge battle between Quatrich and on one side and Jake and Neytiri at the other. And Quatrich looks at him with pure venom hatred, and he says, how does it feel to have betrayed your own kind, right? And so Quatrich stands for this ethno-human moment. Does everyone get that? Who breaks the ethno-human moment? So the first person to break it's not Neytiri. It's actually Neytiri's mother, who says, Neytiri, you train Jake. She almost against her will falls in love with him. And we have this intergalactic, this cosmoerotic love story that takes place. And we have this incredible sex scene, this incredible sexual scene between them, which we're not going to talk about now, in which they put the braids of their hair together so that when they make love, it's not just personal between them, but they're making love with the entire field. There's this wider form of loving. In parentheses, this summer, we're going to do a mystery school in Holland. The last week in August, we're going to talk about the 7 levels of sexing and the 7 levels of Eros in CosmoErotic Humanism. And we're going to look at that scene in Avatar and what this sex scene means. What kind of sexuality is that? But that's not our topic now. Now look what happens, friends. And now it gets very, very dramatic. And I want to try and kind of feel into this with you. So how does Avatar 1 end? Who remembers how Avatar 1 ends? Anyone remember? Who remembers? How does Avatar 1 end? It ends after this great battle in which Jake, stay close, it ends after this great battle in which Jake leads the Navi. They're able to defeat, they kill Quatrich, they defeat the humans, they send the humans home, and the very last scene of Avatar is Jake wakes up in a Navi body. So the human has been transposed into a Navi, but this time he's not just temporarily, his consciousness is not just temporarily in the Avatar body, he's actually become a Navi. And so this is the beginning of this dimension of CosmoErotic Humanism, right? This love story in which love actually moves Jake to go through this transmutation, to go through this transformation, and his consciousness, his humanism, right, can actually appear cosmoerotically, right, in a different body. Quatrich is killed. The ethno-humanism moment, tragically, the tragic moment of ethno-humanism is defeated, but only in this very, very small moment in the galaxy, the humans all go back home, but we know that they're going to return again. Now, friends, look what happens, and it's unbelievably important. And if we can stay kind of like, you know, crazy close here, it's a very strange unfolding that now happens. We now get to Avatar 2. And how does Avatar 2 open? It opens with, you know, 10 minutes of beauty. and this happiness. And Jake says, like, happiness, you don't even know what it is until it's gone. And they're just living this just very beautiful, ordinary life. He's with Neytiri, they have children, right? And they unfold in their lives in this very, very beautiful way. And let's see what happens, right? There's this scene in the very, 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 very beginning. You don't have to have seen the movie. If you haven't seen it, it's totally fine, right? You actually can kind of be with us for a few minutes and then go see the movie this week. It'll be just as perfect. There's this scene in the beginning of the movie in which Neytiri says to Jake, right? And show us the scene if you can, Krista. This incredible scene. It's a strange scene, which we don't even quite know what it means, but it's an ominous scene without which you can't understand Avatar 2. So can you show us the scene? Can we see this? It's like a 15, 20-second scene right at the very, very beginning. Okay, let's take a look at it. Okay, so the scene that I'm talking about is when Spider, and Spider is the son of Miles Quatrich. And in Avatar 2, we meet Spider. He's Miles' son, who was too young to be transported back to Earth at the end of Avatar 1. So he stays on Pandora, and he's raised by Jake and Neytiri. And Jake's very close to him. And Neytiri is helping raise Spider, who's Quatrich's son, but she's not quite comfortable. She's not quite at ease with having Spider play with her kids. Okay, take us inside. Show us the scene. So in this scene, we see that Spider is not quite part of any family, but he's inseparable from Jake and Neytiri's kids. But what she says is he should be playing with his own kind, right? And Jake, who's narrating, he says he's alien. So paradoxically, we see that Neytiri is now falling into this ethno-Navi moment. In other words, the same ethno-human moment that defines Miles Quatrich in Avatar 1, we see this strange moment in Avatar 2 where somehow Neytiri has actually regressed. She actually doesn't quite get it. She doesn't quite get, even though, and it's paradoxical, she's in love with Jake, but Jake for her has now become a Navi. And she's lost the memory of the knowing that she had at the end of Avatar 1, and we'll see this next week, when the very, very end of Avatar 1, when she sees Jake in his human form for the first time, and she says, did anyone remember what she said? She says, I see you. She sees Jake in his human form for the first time, and she says, I see you, and we get that she's able to see Jake and see his heart and see his consciousness. Neytiri forgets that. She forgets it in Avatar 2. And when she sees Spider, she doesn't love him, meaning she doesn't really see him. She physically sees Spider, but she's never able to look at Spider and say, I see you. She can't forget that he's Miles Quatrich's son, and she wants him to be playing, quote, with his own kind. And it's this very paradoxical moment at the beginning of Avatar that's fundamentally missed by everyone. It's the beginning of Avatar 2, but it's the most important part of the movie, because actually what happens in the movie is there's this beginning, this subtle reaching for something more that we can't quite get to. So look what happens. When the movie begins, Miles Quatrich comes back as well. And does anyone remember how Miles Quatrich comes back? And if you haven't seen the movie, let me share it with you. Miles Quatrich comes back in Avatar 2 as a Navi. He has a blue Navi body. Miles Quatrich was killed at the end of Avatar 1, but then they were able to harvest his consciousness and his memories and his lived experience, and they download it into an avatar body, and that's the humans download Quatrich into an avatar body with the express purpose of him being returned to Pandora to fight and defeat the Na'vi. But paradoxically, now stay close, and this is where it gets so much more subtle than what's written about the movie. Paradoxically, who becomes a Na'vi at the end of Avatar 1? Jake. His eyes open the very last second of Avatar 1. But actually, Avatar 2 starts with his arch enemy. And who's his arch enemy? Miles Quatrich, who's now been recycled his consciousness in an avatar body. So Quatrich, who's ethno-human racist in Avatar 1, all of a sudden finds himself in an avatar body. And will that change him? And there's actually a subtle unfolding of Quatrich through the movie. He doesn't get there. Quatrich is by no means a hero in this movie, but we actually begin to see some emergence. Quatrich begins to actually become, paradoxically, in his Na'vi body, we would say in kind of colloquial parlance, he becomes a little more human. But by human, I don't mean human, ethno-human, but actually he begins to feel. And clearly Quatrich, in his old life, was wounded. Raquel, I don't know if you're here, I didn't look at the chat box, but you wrote me a beautiful email about Avatar, where you pointed out very beautifully that clearly Quatrich, this marine hero who's so brusque and so brutal in the first movie, was clearly hurt in life. He was devastated, right? He's wounded, he's traumatized, and he's acting out as this kind of brutal ethno-human racist marine. But somehow something softens in him. This is very subtle, right? In the second Avatar. At the same time, something hardens in Neytiri. And Neytiri actually, in some sense, regresses to become ethno-Na'vi. Now, I'm going to show you a scene now. It's an incredible scene. This is a scene in which Quatrich has the child, the daughter of Jake and Neytiri, and he has a knife to her throat, and he says, I'm going to kill her unless you turn yourself in. So Quatrich is not a hero in this movie. There's just a glimmering of his possibility, but I want you to see, what does Neytiri do? So what Neytiri does in this moment is, right, this is after she's killed 5 or 6 people going to rescue her family, which she has every right to do, but Spider is watching her kill people, and he's looking at it with different eyes. And the reason he's looking at it with different eyes is because in the course of the Avatar 2 movie, Spider is taken captive by Miles Quatrich, right, who is in his avatar body, whose job it is to hunt down and kill Jake Scully. Jake Scully is his adoptive father. Miles Quatrich, or at least the memories and consciousness of Miles Quatrich in this avatar body, Miles Quatrich is actually his biological father. He hates Quatrich, but Quatrich takes him captive and takes Spider with him through a whole bunch of missions. And slowly, Spider begins to see Miles Quatrich. And there's even a moment that he says to Miles Quatrich, right after he's done some heroic act of actually taming this mountain banshee beast that he's able to ride on, he says, I see you. He watches Miles Quatrich, he says, he begins to see the goodness in Miles Quatrich. He begins to see his heart. And all of a sudden, there's this possibility, by seeing him, he opens this new possibility. At the same time, Neytiri regresses into this ethno-Na'vi moment. And when Quatrich, at this key point in the movie, grabs the daughter of Jake and Neytiri and puts a knife right to her throat and says, unless you turn yourself in, Jake, I'm going to kill her. Look at what Neytiri does. So take us inside. Let's take a look. So watch the scene. It's an incredible scene. It's the most important scene in Avatar 2. So what happens? That was Jake Sully on the one side. It was Miles Quatrich who grabs Jake Sully and Neytiri's daughter. You've got Spider, who's Quatrich's son, that wasn't raised by Quatrich. Quatrich is killed at the end of Avatar 1. He's growing up as a kind of brother to this young daughter that Quatrich is holding. So he risks his life, runs in and says, don't hurt her. So that's one. So he breaks. He gets it. Spider gets it. Spider's the next generation. Spider is the universal love story. Spider is CosmoErotic Humanism. He gets it. He's actually the most advanced figure in the entire movie. He's the first one who's trying to hold the new complexity. If you notice, Jake Sully and Neytiri's daughter, who's being held by Quatrich, says to her dad, kill him, meaning she's willing to die to save her dad. And she can't see in Quatrich anything but evil. Spider has a more subtle, nuanced, he's seeing something here. And then what happens? Then Neytiri jumps in, grabs Spider, and says, a son for a son. But 1 second, Neytiri and Jake raised Spider. And all of a sudden, Spider becomes the enemy. And Spider becomes other. And she at least pretends, and she actually cuts Spider to draw blood. And she says, I'll kill Spider if you kill my daughter. And we're not quite sure whether she'll do it or not. But the fact that she's willing to make the threat and the trauma of the threat, and you see the trauma in Spider's face. This is the woman who was his surrogate mother, who now views him as an alien. Then Quatrich says to Neytiri, says, what do I care? I don't care about him. We're not even of the same species, right? But actually, Quatrich does care about him. Even though he's not technically his son, Quatrich has died, but Quatrich's memories are now in this avatar body, and his heart opens. And he steps back and he releases the daughter. Strange scene, isn't it? Then later in the movie, when there's this archetypal battle between Jake Sully and Quatrich, and in the end, Jake Sully triumphs, and Quatrich is in a ship underwater about to die, and Spider is swimming through this underwater ship that's bereft and moored, and Quatrich will die in it. He goes by him, and then he says, he goes back and he saves him. He saves Quatrich. He drags him at the risk of his own life right to shore. And then Quatrich says, come with me. And he goes, I'm not coming with you. Right. So on the one hand, he saves Quatrich. He recognizes his humanity. At a key scene in the movie, when Quatrich learns to ride his mountain banshee, he says to Quatrich, Spider says to Quatrich, I see you. Right? Spider crosses the boundary, right, of a species and says, save this girl who grew up as if it was his sister, even though she's of a completely different species. He risks his life to do it. Neytiri regresses into ethno-Navi consciousness. Jake goes to save his family. All of Avatar 2 is Jake's world becomes his family. Jake actually regresses in a certain sense from ethnocentric and goes back to egocentric. And his egocentric means his people, his clan, his family. That's what he's all about. And Jake is willing in Avatar 2 to endanger the water people, right? Jake is of the forest people, the Omaticaya. He's willing to go endanger the water people in order to save his own family. So he loses his sense of love, right? He regresses and becomes egocentric. Neytiri, right, remains egocentric for her family and ethnocentric for the Navi. And it's actually Spider who begins, right? Spider begins, right, to actually see this wider possibility. Spider goes to save Jake's daughter. Spider risks his life to do it. But Spider also sees Quatrich and says, I see you, at a key scene in the movie. Spider saves Quatrich at the end of the movie. And Spider is beginning to become the embodiment right, of a new possibility. Those are the key figures. There's more to say. We're going to do the final part of Avatar next week, but you begin to understand why this matters. See, this is about, friends, this is about cosmoerotic humanism. It's about beginning to articulate a vision of the cosmos as a love story. In other words, we need to articulate a vision, right, of an intergalactic Homo Amor. Homo Amor is not just human. There's an intergalactic Homo Amor that needs to emerge. And one of the places that the poetry of that intergalactic Homo Amor begins to emerge is in movies. So Avatar is the story of this interspecies love story. Star Trek has some key moments of interspecies love story. The Men in Black has some key moments of interspecies love story. There's a movie called Michael. It's a famous movie, gorgeous movie. It was directed by Sean Daniel, actually, whose wife Ruthie is a dear friend. It's called Michael with John Travolta. It's an incredible movie. And everyone falls in love with the angel, and the angel falls in love with everyone. And so there's this interdimensional, interspecies love story, right? The assertion that there's this force of Eros, right, which moves through the entire amorous cosmos is what we're reaching for. We have to reach across the species divide and move from a cosmocentric, which is a human, global, Earth cosmocentric, to a cosmocentric that actually embraces the cosmos. Because there's little question, friends, that we live in a cosmos that's actually teeming with life. And it's a much broader conversation, but at some point, that life's going to meet us and we're going to meet that life. And so we need to be Homo Amor. We need to be that consciousness of Homo Amor. And we need to be that consciousness that we actually invest right into reality. We need to begin to envision ourselves not only in a global love story with a shared grammar of global value, but we actually quite literally need to be able to articulate and envision an intergalactic love story, right? A love story in which Eros, right, is actually the thread that brings us together. So Avatar hasn't yet done it. Avatar in its second movie has, and whether any of this is in the consciousness of the writers or whether it isn't, completely unclear. Right? Avatar 2, from a certain perspective, is a James Cameron, the same guy who made Terminator, shoot-up movie with a lot of kind of beautiful scenes about water and consciousness. But those are not what matters. And that's what all the reviewers covered. What actually matters here is there a possible emergence? Is somehow Miles Quatrich softening? Is the fact that he's in the body of the avatar and therefore connected to the larger field. Remember how we began today? Miles Quatrich is in this new body, and this body is connected to the larger field, and something's opening inside of him. And so Miles Quatrich actually begins to emerge, right? He begins to see possibility. You can see in his eyes there's a new possibility. And Neytiri, in that moment after she holds Jake and she says, "A son for a son," the camera panned to her face. And if you looked at it carefully, I don't have time to go back to it now, she was shocked at who she had become in that moment. Spider is holding the vision of the future. So we need to see an emergence here. And the reason we're stepping to these Avatar movies is because they're going to be with us for a decade at this key moment in history. So we need to see the evolution of Spider. We need to see the evolution of the children, right, of Jake and Scully. And we'll talk next week about Loat, who's unbelievably important in Avatar 2. So we're going to spend one more week on Avatar. And I'm going to ask you, if you haven't, try and see Avatar 1 and Avatar 2 this week. But do it as not just, I'm clearing my mind to go to the movie. Do it as an act of practice. Do it an act of cosmoerotic humanism. Do it as part of becoming Homo Amor. And we're going to weave this all together next week, right, in the third space. Oh my God. Okay. So we're now kind of late in. I'm going to ask David just to take a second to read the code, because everything we've said this week is about, I love you, right? It's about perception. It's about seeing, right? Myra Bennett, right? I see you, right? Your husband had 12 hours, right, of surgery this week. Ujis, right, I see you, brother, right? Your mom, right, passed this week. Right, Jacqueline, your dad passed this week. You're going to be officiating at the funeral on the 25th. Right? Oh my God, I see you. Right? Love is to see. Love is to say to someone, I see you. We're going to talk about that next week when we get into the depth of Avatar. What does it mean that love is a perception? But David, give us the code that ends this week and that sets the stage for next week, brother.
All right, here's today's code that encapsulates these first values and first principles. Evolutionary love is not merely an emotion, it is a perception. The evolutionary lover sees with God's eyes. Because love is a perception at its core, a perception that generates emotion, there is great hope in love. The universe sees, and the universe sees love. The universe feels, and the universe feels love. Seeing generates feeling, and feeling generates seeing. But we must start with perception because perception can be trained through practice. Personal love is a unique self-perception. Personal self-love is a perception of one's own unique self. However, one cannot be an evolutionary lover with these forms of perception alone. Evolutionary love requires a perception of the entire process of evolutionary process and our place within it. And I turn my word back to you, Mark.
Gorgeous, David, right? Gorgeous, David. Right? So love is a perception, and the evolution of love is the evolution of our capacity to see. Can we see ourselves? Can we see each other beyond labels, beyond boundaries, right? Beyond all the obfuscations, and actually see clearly? That's what Avatar is about, right? Whatever the intention was of the framers doesn't matter. That's what's at play. Can Neytiri see spider as spider, right? Can Quatrich manage in his avatar body, right, to be transposed? Can we see each other? Can we actually participate together intergalactically in the evolution of love? And actually, whether we're heading towards a world of, and not that long from now, intergalactic war, or we're heading towards a world of an intergalactic Homo Amor, it actually depends precisely on our capacity to articulate this vision, which paradoxically is living at the edge of culture. So I want to actually, before we're going to see one last thing for the last minute, and Christian's going to close us. But before we go there, I just want to give everyone if you can, if everyone's up for it, just a little assignment. Come up with, take a look for any movie or literature which talks about interbeing, interalien, interspecies love stories, right? Whether it's in a recent movie, a current movie, right? A science fiction book you read. Let's collect this week the beginning of this consciousness happening not in the formal halls of philosophy, but actually culture reaching for this cosmoerotic love story in which no one's left out, in which love is able to break the boundaries of separation. And I begin to see you uniquely. And that's what love is. Love is a unique self-perception. I see you as a Navi. I see you as a human, not as an other, but that's your irreducible, unique expression of love intelligence and love beauty and love desire, right? That runs through you. Now, we can't close today, friends, without turning and just seeing for a moment. And so our prayer today is going to be Baroi. But before Baroi, we're just going to see the faces of these beautiful men. We don't have the faces of the girls. We haven't been able to find them yet. Who've been hung in Iran. Yesterday, 2 of them. We have to see their faces. We have to feel. We have to feel so much in the world. In this moment, let's feel these gorgeous men and to know that their life's not over, that there's continuity of consciousness, right? That the human body or the Navi body that we find ourselves in is an expression of the larger consciousness of reality, and that there's continuity of consciousness between bodies. And then just like Jake moves from a human body to a Navi body, these men were brave and gorgeous and courageous, and the girls whose faces we're not going to see now who were killed, and Masha Amin, right, who was killed. Actually, their goodness and their truth and their beauty in that larger continuity of consciousness, because this love story is not over in one dimension. It's not just that we're extraterrestrial in possibility, we're extra dimensional. There's more than one dimension. You can't tell the story of the universal love story within the framework of one terrestia or within the framework of one dimension. So Krista, we could just show that minute and a half clip. And we could just kind of hold like the mad honor and the mad love for these men, for these people, for these girls, right, who gave their lives for the sake of goodness and for the sake of freedom. Let's do it. Baroi is the protest song moving through Iran. Give each other, give us just the full power of who we are together, just for the last 3 minutes. Baroi, we're going to put on the words, right, the protest song that these men sung all through Iran, and watch the faces. And let's just look at each other and say, I see you. Take us inside. Baroi, for the sake
برای توی کوچه رقصیدن، برای ترسیدن به وقت بوسیدن، برای خواهرم، خواهرت، خواهرامون، برای تغییر مغزها که پوسیدن، برای شرمندگی، برای بیپولی، برای حسرت یک زندگی معمولی، برای کودک زباله‌گرد و آرزوهاش، برای این اقتصاد دستوری، برای این هوای آلوده، برای ولیعصر و درخت‌های فرسوده، برای پیروز و احتمال انقراضش، برای سگ‌های بیگناه ممنوعه، برای گریه‌های بیوقفه، برای تصویر تکرار این لحظه، برای چهره‌ای که میخنده، برای دانش آموزا، برای آینده، برای این بهشت اجباری، برای نخبه‌های زندانی، برای کودکان افغانی، برای این همه، برای غیر تکراری، برای این همه شعارهای تو خالی، برای آوار خونه‌های پوشالی، برای احساس آرامش، برای خورشید پس از شبای طولانی، برای قرصای اعصاب و بیخوابی، برای مرد میهن آبادی، برای دختری که آرزو داشت پسر بود، برای زن زندگی آزادی، برای آزادی، برای آزادی، برای آزادی.
There's a protest in Germany